What's a really freaked up thing you've witnessed as a kid, but didn't realize it was until you were older? When I was 8, I took care of my father in home who was dying of AIDS. Mom wasn't in the picture. None of the adult family wanted to be near him and help out, because they all said it was contagious. This was the 90s and HIV ignorance was still at an all-time high. I changed his diapers, showered him, fed him, gave him his pills, until he died. As a kid, that was my normal. I didn't realize it at the time, but it really freaked me up. He was my hero and the strongest man alive to me. And seeing him in such a vulnerable state and reduced to nothing really messed up my brain. It just kinda numbed me. Literally could not cry for 12 whole years after that. I still struggle nowadays to feel what I'm supposed to feel in certain situations, but I've gotten a lot better and am definitely more in touch with my emotions. I was once at one of those birthday parties in McDonald's, late 90s, as a young child. There was another party going on the opposite side of the restaurant, so it was pretty chaotic with kids running around everywhere and only a small amount of adults to corral them. There was a man wearing a red t-shirt and blue jeans sitting and eating kind of close to the other party, which was odd in itself, because most adults that were coming in were getting their food and getting out of the noise of 20-plus screaming kids as fast as possible. I only remember him, because looking back on it a little while later, I saw him leaving the McDonald's with a kid from the other party. The kid wasn't struggling or anything, but the man was kind of rushing him out. In my kid brain I assumed it was his dad or whatever, but a couple days later my parents found out through mutual friends that there was an attempted kidnapping in the McDonald's we were at. I don't know if this is true, but part of me feels like I witnessed the attempted kidnapping. Thank God they caught the guy and the kid was okay. And because of that incident my parents lectured my brother and I heavily on stranger danger. When I was a kid, all the kids would sleep in the basement on Christmas Eve to give space for Santa to drop off the presents. That night there was a lot of noise coming from outside on the street, but we couldn't see anything, because there was snow covering the egress windows. My mom came downstairs and told us to stay there, but soon we heard sirens and saw police lights reflecting in the snow. There was a lot of commotion that we couldn't see. Then my dad came downstairs with the very real Santa Claus. He told us that his sleigh crashed in the snow and that the kind police officers were helping him get unstuck, and while they were working he was visiting the kids in the neighborhood. He pulled out a present for each of us and sat with my family while we opened them and sang a few Christmas songs. When things calmed down outside he went back to delivering toys. Years later I learned that there was a large gang fight outside of our house and that a few people died right outside. An older man from our church lived down the road, and knowing my parents had undoubtedly scared children at home, put on his Santa suit and came over once the police arrived. Santa was a hero to me as a child, but that man is a hero to me now. My mother was a drug addict. As a kid lots of things happened as a result of it, but one thing I didn't realize at the time that would stick with me, well, probably forever, but at least thus far, is when my sister's childhood best friend's father committed suicide, and my mother brought my sister and I to their house a couple nights later. The funeral hadn't even happened yet, to break in and steal things to sell for drug money. She said at the time that she had permission to do so. She didn't. She just wanted to rob a dead man, and brought us along to help carry things. I still feel guilty about it. My friend had a lock on the outside of her bedroom door. I thought it was weird, but didn't really think much about it. It turned out her parents would literally lock her in her room for long periods of time as punishment. Lived in a townhouse. In my bedroom at night I would hear the kids next door scream and cry. My parents called the police once, but the man claimed he was playing with his kids and didn't let them in, and apparently the police couldn't do anything. Found out when I was older that the man had later tried to kill the whole family, kids, baby included, with a pair of scissors. Staying up waking my dad when he would stop breathing, later realizing he was overdosing on opiates. Living in an abusive situation as a whole. As a child, domestic violence was the norm for me. When I was at a friend from elementary school one time and his parents were having a disagreement over something, I asked my friend when they'd start hitting each other, and he just looked at me funny, not getting what I meant. As an adult, looking back on my childhood, it's only then you really understand how freaked up it all was. As a child it's intense and frightening, but you don't yet grasp the full situation yet. Cross-posting this comment from another question last year that was similar. My mom would sometimes have us play a game called Army, which consisted of me, my mom, and my siblings army crawling around our apartment. Kind of a hide-and-seek style game. She would yell, "Hit the deck," randomly, and we would all drop and find a hiding spot. We would giggle and giggle while my mom army crawled around looking for us. We loved the game so much. I realized a few years ago while retelling the story that we lived in a really terrible neighborhood, and she would yell it out when she heard gunshots outside the building. I'm assuming she was worried about stray bullets. My parents fighting. Whoever was losing would say to me, "I'm going to run away and drown myself if Mommy Daddy don't stop shouting. I can't take it anymore," and then proceed to leave the house. They're both still alive, and in hindsight I don't know if they ever meant what they said. But now I'm about to have a child of my own. I can't ever imagine doing that to a child, let alone my own child. My mom used to sleep with dudes while I was in the same bed as her. Never really clicked till I got older. Let's say my therapist isn't a fan of my mother at all. I had a cousin that committed suicide by jumping into a quarry. I was 12. My mom and I went to the wake, and when we got to the body, the casket was closed from the chest down. But it was glaringly obvious that he had been at least partially decapitated, because his head was just kind of awkwardly shoved on. They tried their best, but apparently you can't make that look natural. So, years later as an adult, I started wondering why in the world my mom would let me see that. So I asked her. It turned out to actually be a thing that no one in the family spoke about openly. My mom didn't know he would look like that, and neither did anyone else. After my cousin died, he was transported to a funeral home. My aunt insisted on an open casket, which the funeral home refused. It somehow escalated to the point that my aunt hired another funeral home on the condition they have a viewing. No one except my aunt knew any of this until after the wake. So people start showing up, view the body, and see that he doesn't have a neck and was decapitated. And it isn't like you can go around and say, for your information, the dead guy is all jacked up from jumping into a quarry and you really shouldn't look. I was visiting my grandparents in Switzerland when I was about 8 or 9. One evening I happened to be on the balcony looking down at the street, and I saw a white van stop at the side of the road, and 3 or 4 men got out of it and ran up to a man walking along and grab him, knock him down and carry him into the back of the van. Then they drove away quickly. It all happened really fast, so much so that the man barely had a chance to call out for help. I didn't understand what I'd just seen, so I asked my grandfather. I remember him looking down at his feet for a long time, before he told me not to worry about it. Some years later I spoke to my father about it. He told me that at that time, a lot of immigrants from places like Kosovo were being abducted like that, and it was some sort of turf war. When I was about 6 or 7, I remember these 2 girls came to our house and proceeded to beat my mom up. My mom, being no more than 26 or so, was then shoved into the garbage can. She couldn't get out, and I remember just crying and holding my little sister, who is no more than 1 year old at the time. It didn't really hit me until I was about 17. I never forgot what it looked like. My mom just crying and bleeding while trying to get out of the garbage can. My mom going into the bathroom with the guy and being in there for about 30 minutes. I had the most disgusting feeling in my stomach, and when I got older I realized why. She was cheating on my dad. As a kid coming back from Halloween Horror Nights real late at night, I just stare out the window the whole ride home. I saw a truck with the windshield smashed completely out and a man sitting very stiff and unnatural in front of it. Now when I pass that same spot, there's a memorial grave marker there, and I realize that man was probably dead or dying, got thrown through his windshield. One of my youngest memories was my dad crawling into bed naked with me and my sister and cuddle us. For most of my childhood, he did this often. When I got to be about 9 or 10, I realized he was pissing himself from drinking too much, and then waking up and tripping naked and just crawling to the closest bed. He used to pass out on the couch or recliner. I also remember we had roaches so bad that he didn't even care. I remember watching him swipe a roach off his plate while eating. Not killing it, just pushing it aside. My mom had to work when I was little and my older sisters were in school. I was locked in the bathroom during the day until my sisters came home from school and let me out. Sometimes they wouldn't let me out, so they didn't have to watch me. They were 7 and 9 years older than me, and I was somewhat afraid of them, because they were not very nice to me, so I would often stay in the bathroom or hide in the hamper. It does explain why I'm perfectly okay to be alone. My aunt hanged herself in the kitchen while she was supposed to be babysitting me. I was 5 and asleep when it actually happened, so I didn't know my parents had gone out and left me with her. I remember waking up and walking into the kitchen and she was hanging, but it didn't really register that it was my aunt, because her face was obscured by her hair. I was by myself for more than a couple of hours until I started crying. Can't remember why. Neighbors came to see what the fuss was about and called my parents and the police. Parents were pretty devastated, because the reason they asked her to babysit me was because my brother had an emergency, ruptured appendix, and they came home to yellow tape around the house. At her funeral I was told she died because she had been sick. Was around 13/14 when I figured out it was suicide. As a kid we had a young family in the neighborhood. Dad was about 30 and he would always play baseball, wiffle ball, with the neighborhood kids. For some reason anytime the ball went into his bushes he would freak out like stop, I'll get it. I found out years later after he died. He was an alcoholic and was hiding it from his family. He died of cirrhosis and I found out he hid his bottles of vodka in the bushes. Really sad to think of now, because despite his illness addiction, he was such a good influence on the kids in the neighborhood. Always taught us to respect elders and work hard at things if we want to become great. He was a great guy. Very sad to think about now.